A very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. We thank you for taking the time out every Tuesday for the past 3-4 years now to listen to these different topics every week. And we would just want to say thank you to the amount of information that we are receiving from you as the attendees during the week, all the emails and the feedback coming through, as well as the topics. In fact, all this month's topics are because of you out there, the plumbers in the industry, and the things that you wanted to hear. So today, one of the topics you wanted to discuss was employers' responsibilities. And that is because last month we had the responsibilities of employees. So let's get started straight into what are the responsibilities of you as owners of the company, as employers, those who are actually in charge of running the entire health and safety system. And then what help can you also get, not just from your employees, but from institutes like Iopsa, not only with the actual toolbox talks that they are giving, but what about other things that they are doing in the industry to be able to assist you? So let us start off by saying very big thank you to Iopsa, as well as to SIOSH, as well as to PIRB for their CPD points. And please don't forget to make sure you submit it in order to get your CPD points. Well, let's get straight into our toolbox talk then this morning. The OHS Act has 50 sections, and one of the requirements of the OHS Act is to provide for the health and safety of persons at work. So the government has decided that this Occupational Health and Safety Act governs every single company. So let's just remind you that no one is exempt from implementing the requirements of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Yes, there are cases where certain regulations, such as asbestos regulations or diving regulations, all the other regulations that are attached to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, might not fall under your scope of work. Sometimes as a plumber, you will be working in a maintenance position at a private home and you're not performing any construction work. And thus you will only follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act and perhaps the general safety regulations, general administrative facilities, things like that, and maybe only one or two sections from each of these regulations. So how do we understand the dynamic of where the Occupational Health and Safety Act falls with our scope of work? Well, we need to understand what scope of work we are performing, because it is to provide for the health and safety of persons that are working at our company. Now, we are speaking specifically to you as employers. So you need to decide what type of work you are going to be doing. The second thing that you need to protect is also those other than your employees. So let's take the example again of going to a private home. Because there is a homeowner that's there and possibly other workers who are going to be working at that private home, their life could also be in danger by the work that you perform. Now, we get this a lot on sites, and one of the biggest questions coming through is who is responsible for the health and safety when we are on a construction site? And that is a good question. It's a question that has many answers because the OHS Act says that you as an individual company are responsible for your own health and safety. So let's go back to that construction site. Each contractor, from the principal contractor, the main contractor, to all the subcontractors that are on site, all of them are responsible for their own health and safety. But notice the second requirement of the OHS Act, the protection of persons other than persons at work. In other words, other than your employees. So essentially, the law is saying that even if you are on a construction site, you are still responsible to look out for the health and safety of other contractors, other companies, even though they are looking after their own. Your scope, in other words, what you're doing, should not endanger the lives of others. And that is why oftentimes you see high risk category work taking place around barriers, or perhaps they've got it cordoned off and only those contractors are allowed in that area. Do we obey that though? Because we might say to ourselves, well, we have our PPE on, we're on a construction site, we're keeping ourselves safe. It's okay if I go into that area just to pass through or go and fetch something. Well, that's not ideal, because those barriers or those preventative measures have been put there in the hope that it will protect those who are not supposed to be working in that area. So please try and obey that. And as employers, we need to explain this to our employees on site. Remember, we might have the case again when it comes to legislation that other sections or other regulations will affect us. Now, for every single employer, and this is only a suggestion, on some sites it will be a requirement, and we'd like you to, if your boss is not listening in today, if you are an employer, please listen carefully. On some sites, it is going to be a requirement that you go through a course called legal liabilities. This course has been designed, and there are many providers that do this course. Iopsa also has this course available to all of you out there in the industry as well, and it's done online, so you don't have to, leave your office or your home if you'd like to go through this course. It's 2 to 3 hours of fully understanding what law applies to you. Now, when I talk about this course specifically, it is designed through Iopsa specifically for the plumbing industry. So if you're not in the plumbing industry, there is a separate legal liabilities course, and then it is tailor-made around your scope of work. But particularly speaking to you as plumbers, that is because these regulations are going to affect you if you are performing various plumbing works. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, no company is exempt, as we mentioned in the beginning. Every single company, as long as you've got a SIPC document or a sole proprietary certificate, you have to apply the Occupational Health and Safety Act requirements. The next regulation is mandatory for all plumbers, and that is the C19 OHS 2020. That is your COVID-19 guidelines, and these are being revised as our levels of lockdown are constantly changing. Currently, the 17th of August had a new release on the level 2 lockdown requirements, and these requirements state that there are certain things that must be in place, and this is again mandatory requirements for every single company. Now, we often get the argument out on site that, well, I work under another contractor, so my company is working under a different company, so I fall under their file. Yes, we appreciate that. That does happen very often. But please remember that as a company in South Africa, the minute you are not working under that contractor, you then have to have this in place, which means even though you have that project for some time, it is still a legal requirement for you as a company to have these specific protocols in place for yourself, not falling under a different contractor. Then things like your SANS codes, you have to follow your SANS codes, and you plumbers, you know all about SANS codes. You know exactly what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing according to your SANS codes. But in terms of health and safety, one of the SANS codes that's going to affect you very much is your SANS 10085. That is your scaffolding code. This is how to erect or dismantle a scaffolding correctly. And often when you are on a site, you hire the scaffolding, but you need to erect it yourself. So questions that have arisen is, can the scaffolding provider train me in erecting the scaffold? Well, just be wise. Some scaffolding hiring companies are not accredited to train you as a scaffolding dismantler or a scaffolding hand, or even a scaffolding inspector. So if you'd like more information on that, or how to go about ensuring that your company is protected should anything go wrong with scaffolding, please let us know, because we want to give you the right information to keep you safe, as well as potentially others who might be working in and around that scaffold. Then, as we mentioned, construction regulations. So the latest 2014 construction regulations is now fully in force It's been enforced for quite a while, and we must obey that if we are falling within that scope of work of construction regulations. Now, again, we've had the question from many of you out there, what does construction mean? Because sometimes I get to a site, there's no construction work happening there. I'm just digging a trench in order to lay down some piping for a drainage pipe. And this client safety officer is saying that we are performing construction. Well, it depends on the depth of that trench, but yes, there is a very big possibility that you are performing construction work. And that is because the definition of construction is altering or repairing or changing any structure that has been already built. So, because it is not a construction site, does not necessarily mean that you are not performing construction activity. Then, for many of you using driven machinery, this could be lathes or things like that you are working with, depending on the type of plumbing that you are working with. I know some of the smaller plumbers, they don't have these types of machinery, so it might not affect you, but electrical machinery will definitely affect you because you're using drills and grinders, etc. So electrical machinery regulations will definitely affect you. Again, we just need to remind you, it's not the entire regulation that will affect you. It might only be parts of that. So if we look at construction regulation, it covers everything from the principal contractor to the designer to the client, right down to housekeeping, scaffolding, working at heights. It encompasses all the things that could happen on a construction site. You might, however, only be affected by 5 or 6 of those points because you are a subcontractor. So section 8.7, you need to have a construction supervisor on site, and perhaps you're only doing the plumbing and trenching work, and so you will only look at that particular section. So please don't feel like this is a daunting situation. Now I've got to look at all these regulations and apply it into my safety file. Yes, we need to understand and know how each regulation affects us, but it's only parts that you will be taking out and designing a proper procedure. You will include it into your risk assessment, and you will make sure that if that regulation requires specific training, that that training gets done. And again, this is to protect you and your employees, as well as others who are not part of your employment in that site, whether it is on construction, in a private home, in a commercial building. And then a few other regulations that will affect you, such as environmental regulations for workplaces, facilities, general administrative, normal documentation that you must have in terms of the law, general machinery regulations, general safety, hazardous biological agents, which are going to affect almost every single company in South Africa moving forward, because that is currently being revised. And this is how we are going to base our risk assessments, is on a hazardous biological agents regulations update. And this is just due to COVID-19 and how we are actually generating our risk assessments moving forward. For many of you, you do not use hazardous chemicals on site. Well, what about cement? Is that a hazardous chemical substance? And we're going to have that during the course of this month. In fact, it was one of the questions you asked. So please don't forget to tune in when we do discuss that. Because we are using drills and electrical machinery and sometimes other plant or equipment on site, noise-induced hearing loss regulations will also affect you at times. And then finally, we look at pressure equipment regulations, or also your vessels under pressure regulations. These could also affect you as plumbers. Now, again, we're speaking to you as employers. Legal liabilities is understanding how the law affects you and what requirements of the law you must implement. So again, that course has been designed in order to help you as a CEO, or what the OHS Act calls a 16.1 responsible person, and that is in order to help you understand not only are you in control of the overall management of the health and safety of the business, it says that you as the CEO or the Chief Executive Officer must, as far as reasonably practicable, ensure that all the duties of his employer as contemplated in this act are properly discharged. And that's section 16.1. That is basically what it means. In order for you as an owner to know, no matter what position or what scope of work you are providing, the OHS Act is affecting you. And that is in order to keep yourself safe, to keep your employees safe, and then also others who might be affected by your work. So this is a brilliant course to go on. And as I mentioned, you might have certain sites that have it as a requirement. This is a suggestion from our side, because as an employer, first of all, you need to know and understand what you should be doing so that you can actually do it. Now, we can't play the card where we say, well, we didn't know, even though it's very true. Oftentimes, we have worked with some of you out in the industry, and genuinely, we could see that you didn't know that the law actually required this of you. But when we brought it to your attention, you took immediate steps in order to get it rectified. And we want to show our appreciation to the employers out there who have done that. Now, when we spoke about section 16.1, that is just identifying you as an employer. Section 8 is really the full weight of your liability. In other words, section 8 points out exactly what you as an employer, as the CEO, 16.1, must be doing all the time. So this is not per site. This is not maybe if you'd like to. This is if you own a company. This is mandatory, a minimum requirement. In fact, minimum requirement means you can always have a higher standard of health and safety. So as a minimum, section 8.1 states that you as an employer shall provide, in other words, you must provide and maintain, as far as reasonably practical, a working environment that is safe and without risk to the health and safety of his employees. Now notice you have to provide a working environment. This is not just a task. Perhaps you are going to a site and you're going to ensure that you have a safety file for that site. Even if you have an office, whether it's based at home, based in your vehicle, or based in a corporate park, each one of you must ensure that wherever work is carried out, it is carried out in a safe manner. Now, again, this is not a daunting project. You do not have to have documents upon documents to prove this. Oftentimes, it can be a one-page policy to ensure that what you are doing, you are showing your commitment to health and safety. But please remember, you need to have evidence to back your policies. And this comes down to section 8.2a. You will notice section 8.2a states that as an employer, you must provide and maintain a system of works. Now, a system of work is a safe management system whereby the actual safety file or safety management system, whatever it is you work with, whether it's ISO systems or a basic OHS Act system, is a live system, because you provide it and you maintain it. And we only maintain something that is consistently working, much like our buckies that we drive. Not only do we purchase them, but we have to maintain them. Then we also look at plant or machinery that we have, and all of this must be done safely and without risk to our health. We also then, under section 2b, take steps that may be reasonably practicable to either eliminate or mitigate hazards or potential hazards. And this is coming back to our main requirement as an employer. Section 8.1, a working environment that is safe and without risk. Where does risk come from? Well, it comes from hazards that are evident on site. And there are two things that we must do as employers. The steps that we take, and those steps need to be outlined. It's called a risk methodology, or how we go about identifying hazards and eliminating the risk or mitigating. So mitigation to make it safer. Oftentimes we see a pair of gloves, a pair of safety boots, or a hard hat being given out, and that is a mitigating factor. Yes, it does go a long way in helping that employee, but it is not the first step. That is only the last step that we take. So as an employer, we need to know, is it reasonable and is it practical, the steps that you have taken in order to eliminate or mitigate the hazards on site. And then there are things such as ensuring a risk assessment has been done. All Section 8, all the sections are ensuring that you have a risk-based thinking approach to your management system. We come down to Section 8.2E. This is another requirement as an employer, and that is for you to provide instruction, information, training, as well as a supervisor or some sort of supervision as may be necessary to keep your employees safe. And remember, this also extends to non-employees who may be affected by your scope of work. Now, those are 4 things that it is requiring of you to do. Information could be something as simple as a sign. Instructions could be something as simple as getting your entire workforce to listen into these toolbox talks. They are being instructed in health and safety. Sending them on the free training that Iopsa offers you quite often. And then ensuring that somebody watches, even if it is you yourself, and that you have been appointed as a supervisor, but we want to stop there. How do we know that that supervisor is competent? Now, that leads us into a whole another discussion, because competency means that that person not only has knowledge of the scope of work, but he has an understanding of how the work must be done. So he should be actually performing that work before becoming a supervisor. He's got knowledge and experience. And then in some cases, he needs to be certified. In other words, he has to be trained to not only know and understand the work, but because we are talking about a health and safety perspective, a supervisor should know and understand the health and safety regulations. And so it is very advisable that you also send this person, someone who is supervising your workforce, on the legal liabilities course as well. Now, as far as practical, you must ensure that all your employees work in accordance with the Act, with your own personal policies and procedures in terms of health and safety, and make sure that all of them know and understand the dangers attached to their work. And this is really the crux of the entire OHS Act for you as a Section 16.2. And this is because vicarious liability, now in the law, it is a very well-known principle in South Africa that an employer, so a 16.1, could be vicariously liable for the negligent act of his or her employee. So if they act negligently and they do something that is against the law, you as an employer can be held vicariously liable, which basically means liable without fault. It's not your fault, but you are still liable because the law says that you must, as an owner, take charge of the health and safety of your company. So please remember, it is an extremely important responsibility that you have. It cannot be delegated out to any person, but you can ask for assistance. So some of the questions you might have to ask yourself is, first of all, has the chief executive officer been identified? This is sometimes very simple in companies. If you are the owner of the company, then automatically you are the 16.1. If you hold the position of CEO, then obviously you are already been identified. But if you have a board, a group board of members, well, then we have to take a look at shares and who has the most controlling profit in the company, and that's where we identify the CEO. And then the second question, has this person been made conversant with his or her legal duties? If you say no, you still cannot say that you don't know, because the law applies to you. So perhaps you might ask yourself, should I not attend a course on legal liabilities? Now, you can delegate responsibilities, not your liability, but you might appoint a section 16(2). And if you've done that, are you ensuring that that person has received the necessary training to know and understand what they should be doing? And then under section 8, we're going to ask a very important question. Did your organization or company implement a health and safety management system in order to ensure proper control? And then you'll notice OHS Act section 37.2 comes into play, where we take a look at your contractors, those who might be affected by your scope of work as well. Well, that's all we can really say to you as employers out there in the industry. We don't want to take too much more time. I see we're already heading up to the half-an-hour mark. And we just want to say thank you very much, because each aspect of a health and safety system, each block or building block of a health and safety file basically falls not only within the OHS Act itself, with the other regulations coming through, but you as an employer must provide for that safe working system. You're always going to be looking at your risk-based thinking, implementing your training, making sure your supervisors are competent, taking the necessary precautions in order to reach your compliance. And this is not just to reach a 100% audit percentage. It is to ensure that each one of those persons that you value in your company as employees are kept safe. And this is really the essence of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So as a reminder, you do have that Iopsa sponsored training. If you'd like some more information on that, please reach out to us at info@ohss.co.za, as well as to safety@iopsa.org. Now, that is for the SheRep course happening during this month. We are doing a national drive all the way. We're currently in KZN at the moment. Looking forward to the training tomorrow and Thursday. Then we'll be in the Eastern Cape as well as the Western Cape. And I believe there's also been a course designed for those out in the Free State as well. So we'll keep in touch with all of you that we are already chatting to. Please remember, you can send 2 employees free of charge if you are an Iopsa member, and then take advantage of the other discounted training for the month of September that we are promoting for all of you out there in the industry. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us this morning, and we look forward to chatting you during the week. Thanks, Jacques.